Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started and do some formal introductions. But we want to name that we're really excited for this opportunity to be here with you all. And we hope that you walk away with some information about how you can further implement this type of program in the state of Texas. All right, Greg, I think you're up.
All right. Yes. Hey, everyone. So yeah, we are 3 of the 11 grantees in California. So we're all Californians and hella excited to be here with you all. My name is Craig Terry, pronouns he, him, his, and I am the prevention coordinator and youth organizer for the Close to Home grants. And we are Community Beyond Violence, and we're based in Grass Valley, which is a town in Nevada County.
My name is MK, and I'm actually a Texan, but I'm out here in California now. So doing prevention with Craig at Community Beyond Violence, and ours is a little star in Northern California. And I do adult coordinating, and pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi again, my name is Sarah Diamond. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the lead prevention and community engagement specialist at Center for Community Solutions in sunny San Diego. I am the youth organizer for our Close to Home program in our organization at CCS, and my colleague Jessica Valencia is the adult organizer who unfortunately cannot be here today. But yeah, that's us.
Hi, my name is Arthi Katari. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the youth organizer at Lumina Alliance, which was formerly Rise and Stand Strong in San Luis Obispo, which is right in the middle of California. And I have my coworkers photo on here as well, Callie Tanok, who is our adult organizer, who is on this call, but this is only her 7th day of work, I believe. So we're very excited that she's here as well.
So what is Close to Home? We wanted to kind of ground ourselves in first unpacking and helping everyone understand what Close to Home is, because we know there are folks in the room in the virtual space who don't actually know what Close to Home is. So Close to Home is a community mobilization project. It is driven by the community. It's by the community for the community, essentially. It's all about primary prevention. It's truly about preventing violence from ever occurring in the first place in the communities that we're working in. It is intergenerational. So as you notice, some of us said we're youth organizers, some of us said that we are adult organizers, but then we come together with both of our teams to do an intergenerational project. So we do work separately, and then we come together, which I think is a really unique aspect of this project. And our program is actually funded through the California Department of Public Health. So it is a form of rape prevention education in California, but our funding for RPE comes directly from the Department of Public Health. And it is broken down into 4 phases. And we don't think you need to know all the pieces of the 4 phases, but we kind of wanted to ground you all in what it looks like. So the assess phase is really about recruiting the teams that we're working with and finding out who the community is. I think we should have said this a little bit earlier, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit further, but we picked different neighborhoods or communities to work with for each of our grants, mainly because our populations vary so widely, but it's not possible to do this work in like a full large scale way, right? You have to pick like kind of smaller populations to work with. And so we're really trying to find out who is the community that we're working with, what is the focus area of that community, what are their concerns of that community, the concerns of the participants in our group, and we want to dive deeper into these conversations of what is it that the community needs from us. And I think something important to note too is that all of us as facilitators are coming in as folks who are there to elevate and amplify the needs of the community, not to tell the community members, this is what you need from us. We are not the experts in their community. They're the ones telling us what they need from us. So that's the assess phase.
And then we jump into the talk phase. And the talk phase is really taking everything that we've learned in the assess phase, where it's, who is the community? What does that look like? All those things that you do, and taking a deeper look into that. And once we have that, really basing off who can we talk to? Who are community leaders? Where do we need to go? And collecting more data that way through community conversation, through finding your stakeholders, your influential people, and really having that discussion further about what our community means. and what our community needs most. And it really gives us a deeper look of kind of where to go from here. And it's and it can look different depending on how your team handles it. Every single agency in close to home in California has different kind of strengths and weaknesses and all those things that we'll get into when we talk about our communities. But the talk phase is really really based on who your community sees. Who do we need to reach the most?
And after we really talk to those influential people and elevate voices of different groups of our community members, we come together to unify on a sort of campaign. And we're building that through the action of the final thing, which is ACT. But the build phase before that is leveraging all your community resources, networks, and some of those resources that we took away from those conversations to build something that can be lasting, sustainable, and address what needs to happen in the community right now. And so this can look different depending on what kind of projects you're working on. But it's really, we're going to get to the nuts and bolts of laying down the foundation for the logistics and identifying a clearer vision. And we have, right now in the phases where we're at, most of us we're kind of in the build and the act phase. So it's actually where the group gets to really get engaged and start to get out there in the community. And really the whole goal is to have a creative action, which Arthi can share about.
Yeah, and so the ACT phase, like MK said, and like Craig hinted at also, is where we are amplifying the voices of our community and launching some kind of campaign or project or action that sort of brings together everything that you have learned in Assess and Talk. And so it's, like MK said, inviting the community to engage in a sustainable way and collaborate together. And in the way that Assess and Talk, you can sort of blend between the two phases. ACT is the phase that has to follow Build. And it's really only when the network, like our group that we're going to talk about in a minute, feels like they are ready to launch this project. So like Sarah said, that it's driven by the community. The ACT phase can only happen when the community is ready for it. And one thing that I also wanted to note, like, all of the phases are important. The ACT phase can be very appealing to see, like, this is the end all be all, but they're all very critical to the process. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about primary prevention. And we have a picture of a bridge here because I like to tell the upstream river story. And I like using this because I like metaphors, and this might be a story that you all have heard before. But the story goes like this. So a person is fishing by a river, having a grand old time, waiting for some fish. And they see someone floating past them, calling out for help. They're drowning in the river, and so the fisherman jumps in to save them. Not 2 minutes later, another person comes floating by, also drowning, also calling out for help. So the fisherman jumps in and saves this person too. And before all of these people can even catch their breath, more and more people start floating down the river. They're all in distress. And so the fisherman decides to go upstream and figure out what is going on. And so when the fishermen gets upstream, they notice that it's a disaster zone. The bridge is broken. The signs that are warning about danger are all torn down. People are pushing people into the river. And so the fisherman realizes the only way to solve this problem of people drowning in the river is to fix what's causing people to fall in the first place. And so in our work, in our field, all the steps of helping survivors are kind of present in this river metaphor, right? So advocacy would be jumping in, helping people once they're already in the river. Awareness raising is posting signs that, hey, this river is really dangerous. Risk reduction is giving people flotation devices or teaching them how to swim once they're already in the river. And primary prevention is what the fishermen noticed, is fixing the bridge so that people can get across the river without falling and get across safely. And so like Sarah mentioned earlier, primary prevention is the activities that take place before violence has happened with the goal of stopping that initial perpetration. So this can be things like establishing healthy social norms, skill building, things like that. Then we talk about secondary prevention, and this is more of the immediate response after violence has already occurred to sort of address those short-term consequences. This can be an early intervention or something that decreases the prevalence of the issue. So like being a bystander or an upstander. And this is very valuable, but it's not necessarily primary prevention. And then tertiary prevention is the long-term response after violence has happened. Again, it's the after, to address the long-term consequences. And this level of prevention does nothing to reduce the incidence or prevalence of an incident. And when we're talking about primary prevention, which is the model that Close to Home works within, you cannot do primary prevention without connecting it to other social justice issues. And this is something we're going to touch on later. And we know that working to end sexual violence and relationship violence at its root is about understanding power and privilege. And so when we break it down like that, it's, when we break it down like that, it's seeing how certain groups of people who have more power will take privileges away from other groups with less power. And using this framework allows us to see how the same roots that allow sexual violence to exist are the same roots that feed into discrimination based on race or gender, sexual orientation, class, religion, etc.
So how does this connect to public health and to really the social ecological model that I'm sure so many of us are aware of as preventionists? So I would say that a lot of the rape prevention education that I would say most of the country, not just California or Texas, is doing often focuses on the individual and the relationship, right? We're teaching people all the things that Aarti had just talked about, whether that's like healthy relationship skills or it's about consent or it's bystander intervention, right? And it's really focusing on these individuals and the relationships that they're having with others, with themselves, et cetera. For Close to Home, we're really trying to also address the community and societal level. And so it's really bringing together the entire community. Violence prevention is a community issue, right? It has to be solved by the community together. And so it means that it can't just be the individuals who are learning all of these incredible topics, right? And all of these wonderful classes, right? But then how do we like create that actual systemic change within their communities? So for example, when it comes to the community and societal level, this might look like having kitchen table conversations or community conversations and having community actions. And so getting the community invested, right? So we did like a virtual town hall to kind of have an idea of like what the community cared about, right? And then when it comes to societal, this might look like proclamations, educational campaigns, widespread digital outreach. And for example, at our organization, we had a youth who was invited to Orange Day for like Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, but she was invited by like the Capitol and like by the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. And that was like a really big deal. And her school was super invested in her going. And that like made such an impact within her community that they had a student going from their high school all the way up to the Capitol, right, to talk about why these issues are important and why teens should be invested in it. I don't know, Craig, MK, and Aarti, if you all want to share some of the societal level things that y'all have done at your agency.
Sure. So one thing that we were just going to touch on at CBV is really attending town hall special meeting topics, or really just attending any meeting that will hold us, you know, that we can create those kind of connections and to do this work further is such an important aspect of this work.
Yeah, and at Lumina Alliance, our youth have had multiple proclamations passed in the city recognizing Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month as well as Sexual Assault Awareness Month as issues that the city cares about and is going to at least recognize and hopefully work to prevent. And so this kind of creates that norm that, okay, an entity that's larger than just our volunteer group is going to make change about an issue.
Perfect. So now we're going to talk about our areas of focus and our towns instead. Because as we said, we're all over California. MK and myself, we're in the Northern California in Nevada County, which we put here Western Nevada County because Nevada County is huge, and we also have another agency up in Truckee that does the same work, but our populations are very different. But we are so we had to really focus on where do we want to start, and that's where we found our most centralized kind of population is in our downtown areas of Grass Valley and Nevada City. That's really where people come to hang out, and we have a big tourist kind of area too there. And we thought that's how we can really reach the people we're trying to reach.
And we talk a lot about community and what that means. And something to really leverage here is building relationships, because that is how we need to start, is building a connection so that we can share these hard to talk about conversations. We have to create an established trust system and safety. And when we come to rural communities like our little town, we are very independent. We live out in the woods. We take care of our own. And so there's different challenges. We have a really close-knit community. There's a lot of locals who kind of keep out in the rural areas. And there's a lot of transients who have a lot more privilege and come kind of stay more downtown. But really one of the issues is that we're kind of less likely to report to police because people are so self-reliant. And so that often stunts the stats and lets people perceive that it's not an issue, but in fact, it really is an issue. Sexual assault and domestic violence are pretty prevalent in our small town. And often that's due to some of the barriers that we have, just having less access to resources. So one of the things is we don't have very good transportation at all. We have very hard housing situation, low access to internet and technology and education, limited employment. And so that creates increased substance abuse, mental health problems. And we know that stress can relate to crime and violence. And so even though we have a cute little quaint downtown, we still are lacking a lot of ethnic diversity. We're 93% white. We're one of the whitest counties in California. And there is a desire to change that. But we are definitely very behind the times where we are. So we're just trying to get people on the internet so that they can join us over Zoom. But that could be like, people might live 40 minutes deep out in the woods. So we have different challenges than say a place in San Luis Obispo or San Diego. And I'm sure you all have different challenges living in rural or more populated areas. But what's great is that we have a really rich local community that wants to make change and really prioritizes local change. And so there's a lot of support from nonprofits, leaders, and law enforcement. And being in California, we do have increased access to resources for mental health access and also social services. So even though we typically, rural areas have less access, our communities prioritize that. So I would say comparatively, we do have a higher access to social services compared to places like Texas. And that's just a difference in policy and kind of community action and also state government. But yeah, Nevada County is definitely a great place to look at how has primary prevention been looked at years past, and how can we move forward and adopt and help our communities grow with these opportunities that technology brings, and addressing other issues that can connect us all in this work. And next, we'll have a nice contrast with Sarah can tell us a little bit about San Diego.
Yeah, our population alone, and that is only for the City Heights neighborhood. So as I shared, we each pick different areas within our respective counties, right? So I'm in San Diego County. And City Heights is only a neighborhood within the actual city of San Diego, and it has a population of 75,000 people. So it's not really a tight-knit community, but we're trying to do this work. But it's really very different compared to SLO and then also Nevada County. But it is considered San Diego City's most diverse neighborhood with significant Somali, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, and Latina communities. And it's actually one of 6 nationally sponsored refugee settlement communities in the country. There are over 45 different languages that are spoken within City Heights. It actually has a pretty large youth population. Over 30% of the population are people under the age of 18. And there are approximately 1,000 nonprofit organizations that are located within City Heights, which means that doing this type of work can be really difficult. Because there's such a high concentration of nonprofits and community-based organizations, I think that a lot of times the community is really tapped out for this nonprofit engagement, because they have so many different people trying to make all of these changes or do all of these programs, right? And I think it can really lead to a lot of burnout and also distrust of new organizations that are coming in, right? And I would say we are a relatively new organization, partially because we don't actually have a physical office in the City Heights neighborhood. So we have 3 different offices throughout San Diego County, like in the Northern County, in the Eastern County, and then like on the coastal side. And City Heights is pretty like smack in the middle of the city of San Diego, and we do not have an office there. And that makes it really challenging because all of these other nonprofits that are doing work inside of City Heights all have locations, have offices, and are able to better serve the community that way. And we are often the outsiders who are coming in with tons of bags, as I'm sure you all imagine, right? And are like notes and everything that we need for the day, right? But it's really limiting in so many ways that we don't have a physical location in that space. And I guess for context as to why we chose that, it's because previously my coworker and I did a lot of work with youth in detention, and our youth were coming primarily from the City Heights region, and they were the ones saying that City Heights was violent and that it would never change. And so we thought, let's partner with the City Heights community. And I think that was great. And right, because of the lack of a physical location, that made it much harder. Most of our residents have echoed these thoughts, that their concerns are around gentrification, homelessness, cleanliness, and police brutality. In particular, San Diego, the further east you go, the more, I think the more diverse the communities are, but there is a neighborhood that is to the west of City Heights, and that has already been gentrified for years, and now it's creeping into their neighborhood. And so that is a concern for my youth in particular, who are worried that will their parents be able to continue to afford living in City Heights if they're priced out, right? If other wealthier folks are coming in and then raising the prices for them. For our community, we do have a really highly involved district council member who is actually very supportive of the work that we do, has written proclamations for us, has attended our virtual town halls, has invited us to different events. And he seems like he's really for the community. He's from the community. And so we really leverage that partnership as much as we can, which is really wonderful. He's one district council member, right, out of all of the council members that represent San Diego City, but he's really supportive of our work. And I think that's such a benefit to have a council member that is yes, I really believe in this, and sees the intersections of other social justice issues with sexual violence and intimate partner violence prevention. We are a multicultural and multilingual team. So the youth group is run in English, but our adult group is run completely in Spanish. And I wish Jessica was here to talk more about what that dynamic looks like. Jessica is the adult organizer and runs her group completely in Spanish. And it is, I think, such an incredible way that she does that. And when we work intergenerationally, it means that we have to figure out how are we going to navigate this, because not all of my youth speak Spanish. Most of them do. I speak Spanish myself. And so there's often this translation and interpretation that's going on. So I just want to shout out Jessica in particular, because not only is she running a group, she's also often playing interpreter, which is an additional part of her job, right? And so that is a very important thing that I think she should name, or that I should name rather. But because we've had these challenges of like getting into the community since we don't have a physical location, we've had to really be creative about how we have made connections. And so we've like partnered with local cafes, with the YMCA, with high schools, with elementary schools, local parks. We try and like make our presence known and then partner with them as much as possible in order to have actual physical locations to meet with our groups. Obviously, this past year with COVID, that was different, which we will talk about later on at the end of the presentation. But those are some of like the challenges and I'd say strengths of working in this neighborhood in San Diego City. It's a very different population, I think, than the rest of San Diego, and at 75,000 people, it's a lot to work with.
So last but not least, talking about San Luis Obispo. So San Luis Obispo City is part of San Luis Obispo County. So we call it SLO for short. SLO is a very close-knit community in the Central Coast area. The surrounding county is a little bit more rural with a lot of farming populations. But in SLO City, we also have a college town. Our local university has over 20,000 enrolled students, and our local community college has over 10,000 enrolled students. And so all of these things combined sort of change the makeup of our city from season to season as people are in school, coming, going. And we're also a very large or a very big tourist destination. And so that affects what our community looks like from season to season. The fact that San Luis Obispo City has a very small central downtown area makes it very easy to reach people. It sort of is the central hub. Most events take place in our central Mission Plaza Square or on the main street downtown. And so again, this makes it very easy to reach people who might not know about Lumina Alliance or about Close to Home, who might just be passing through and then get connected to our work. Our community also has a very large social justice activism presence. The events of summer 2020, as we know, sparked nationwide protests, and one of our own local activists was wrongfully arrested, and the community really rallied around that cause. And additionally, we also have a ton of nonprofits, not as many as San Diego, but a very large nonprofit presence. And there's a lot of groups focused on mutual aid. I think we have over 300 nonprofits. As well, Lumina Alliance is very beloved in our community. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we are the result of a merger between two other organizations, and some form of domestic violence and sexual assault work has been done in our community since the 1970s, I believe. And so people are very familiar with our agency, what we stand for. And because of this support that our agency has, it made Close to Home a lot easier, I guess, to implement and get support behind our volunteer group. Our Close to Home has specifically worked to build really strong collaborations with our local Pride Center, which I'm going to touch more on this later. And one unique thing about fostering our community, at least for the youth, is the fact that we do have a physical space in our Lumina Alliance offices. So this is a room in our office that the youth can come in, they can use it however they want, they can decorate it, they can come do their homework, hang out, they can work on Close to Home projects. But it's really important that we have this physical space for kids to come, for our youth to come after school or whenever they want, really. And then challenges, I guess, similar to what MK touched on, our community is also lacking in diversity. And this is something that we try to be really mindful of as we're doing our work in the community with Close to Home, and making sure that all voices are represented, even if it's not necessarily represented in our community.
Okay. So I'm going to touch on retaining youth volunteers because it can be a struggle. It can definitely be a struggle, especially so in Nevada County, because we are so spread out. It's a real struggle for youth because there's that lack of transportation. There's that lack of what's there to do around here. And it's really creating some kind of a space where they feel that they can go after school or they can go and be able to not go home or anything else. So what we found was, I mean, obviously food always brings people together, but the fact that this work revolves so much around human connection and around creating these relationships. And if you create that bond, be a friend, then they're more likely to stay. And if you create that, you can go to your most passionate volunteers and say, hey, bring your friends, come, like, bring whoever you want and come and join our team. And then if they have their friends there, they're more likely to stay with you as well. We have stipends and scholarships that are available in the form of Visa gift cards is what we do. And it depends on, if they come a certain number of times or anything like that. And that's something that you can work out with your team. A way that I found that was easy, I guess not easy, easier to recruit was really having a one-on-one conversation. We had a lot of community, come check out close to home, and we invited everyone. And from those, we'd get no response. So what we found more beneficial was really meeting with students one-on-one, saying, hey, let's grab a burger. After the food, we're like, let me show you this cool project I got going on that I think you'd be an amazing part for. And really having just a human conversation, saying this isn't a 4-year commitment you're making. I'm just saying, check out one meeting. And what we found was if they can come to one meeting, usually they'll stay. And then if you could bring their friends, they'll stay even longer. So it's really about building bonds and creating that kind of safe place where they feel, because we talk about heavy topics, especially when we get to the intergenerational part, but sharing those kinds of different opinions and all those things, you really need to make it easy as possible. And it doesn't always have to be close to home every second. Understanding what your group needs the most, whether that's turning into a support group for the day or processing. If something like the last 2 years, there's always something different going on in the world. So processing those feelings and understanding. Sierra Community House up in Truckee, they have their youth meetings over Minecraft. They play video games and talk about these things. And like it's all about those types of creative, strategies that we're going to be talking about. Did you all want to share about your retaining youth?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch a little more on the relationship building aspect. Craig, you did a great job, but just adding that the relationship building can happen without the youth organizers present, as much as we want the youth to like bond with us as well. I think it's really important for them to bond with each other. And at least at Lumina Alliance, our current group of close to home volunteers, I don't know how this happened, but we created a space where they really all connected with each other, even though they all come from really different walks of life and have very different interests. They became very close through the process of going through the close to home orientation curriculum together. And they're all really good friends now and support each other in things outside of the close to home work. And then just touching on that last bullet point, the leadership roles and opportunities, I think that's something that's really important. If your youth are telling you that that's what they want, like finding opportunities and ways to make that happen, and like building those leadership skills. So for example, we have youth who have gone to speak at city council or at statewide webinars just recently, and also giving leadership roles outside of your agency or outside of close to home. For example, One Love has a summit that our youth have attended. So just finding things that fit what they want to do as well.
Yeah, I really second that. What Arthi just said about giving them lots of opportunities to engage in related to sexual violence or IPV prevention, but maybe isn't necessarily through your organization. We've definitely sent them to One Love, and then when they completed those series, we actually paid them a stipend, because we were like, oh, well, this counts as part of your close to home programming. We said it was ongoing training for them. And we were really intentional about stipends for a very long time. I will say that CDPH, the California Department of Public Health, as our funder, requires that we do pay a stipend in some capacity. Each organization gets to determine what that looks like. They require it. but they don't necessarily fund enough of it. And so we've had to look to outside organizations and outside grants in order to have the money that we needed to pay our youth. So we had received the Panera Share the Dough grant, and that paid for all of the food that we had our first year and then all of their stipends. And that was really, really helpful. But so we paid them, right, for attending these other trainings. And then anything that I see that I think is connected to their passions, I always send them like, hey, these are additional trainings you can attend. But I think two things I want to touch on are honoring their ideas, right? There are so many things that my youth are really passionate about that I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to talk about within group if that's something that's important to them. Right now, this group, again, is really interested in gentrification and homelessness. Like that's what continuously comes up. And in my previous group, I feel like they were really interested on the topic of like sex ed. For full transparency, my background is a sex educator or sex education. And so my youth were really interested in that. And then we would have conversations about that. And I think because I was willing to be a trusted adult in their life and have those conversations with them, they were more invested in the group. And it's not on here, but I would say that being real with them is also a way to retain youth. We'll talk more about COVID later, but this year's been really hard these past 19 months. And there have been many times where I have just not felt good myself to facilitate group. And I have straight up texted my youth and said, guys, my mental health today is complete crap. Like I just don't have it in me to run group. Is it cool if we postpone? And the like love and care and support that they have like sent back is just so lovely, right? They're like, oh my God, Sarah, please take care of yourself. Like we care about you. We like want you to be good today. Like let's meet another time. And I think it's really important as adults that we model to them that like, it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to have mental health struggles. It's okay to like not feed into capitalist productivity, right? And to say like, we need this space too as the adult organized or the adults in your life. And youth are totally understanding of that, right? And then I think that gives them the opportunity to be honest with us when they're struggling, when they like need that space or that break, then they feel good to come to us because we've already modeled what healthy boundaries look like, right? Or we've already modeled that it's okay to talk about these things. So I think that's really important. And I'm sure any person that's working with youth knows that building rapport with youth is so important, but I really make it a point to model to them that like, having mental health struggles is totally okay and that we need to like take time for ourselves.
There's a really good question in the chat that I thought maybe we could bring up really quick from Corinne. It says, how do you get the message out to youth to even attend an initial meeting? And they're having trouble connecting via social media and finding opportunities to do so in person. And that is a good question because especially over this last little bit, it's been challenging to connect. And so what we've been focusing on is not reinventing the wheel, but looking at where are the youth already going and where can we connect with them. And so for Craig and I, we're fortunate to have a really strong local youth center. And so when we were having a hard time with recruitment, we like hit them up on an email, had a really engaged meeting about how we could help each other out. And in some ways, we're kind of reducing the load, right, when we collaborate. And so we can fulfill that position by coming in and maybe doing a short, maybe like a 30-minute activity on healthy relationships. And it might be just an introductory to get ourselves in the door to meet these folks. And then we can, they're more likely to get involved if they've had an initial meeting. So sometimes it can just look like just showing up thinking about different outreach opportunities. But yeah, it's different depending on each different group that you're trying to engage. And social media is definitely one of the ways to focus because youth are so inherently on social media. But we definitely have had to, unfortunately, lower our expectations in some regard, recognizing that youth are at capacity for handling difficult conversations. And so instead of really focusing on pushing forward during these hard times, talking about the dredges of sexual assault and domestic violence, we decided to focus our shift on how can we hold space for these youth and connect with different topics that are important to them. And one of the important topics was on policing in our town. And so one week we noticed that there was an opportunity to hold a safe space for people to come and have a support group. And so we totally shifted lenses to what the youth needed. And so sometimes it just means thinking outside of your box and thinking, just looking at and talking to parents, talking to different youth organizers. And we really gained a lot from talking to different leaders about the different struggles that youth were going through. And then also having rich one-on-one conversations with youth in your life. You know, what would you be going through if you were trying to battle COVID and then also trying to get in college, and what does that look like? So really being there as a bridge and a network for leadership and change, I think is kind of the best way to get and connect with youth. But does anyone have anything else to add to that?
I was just gonna say, really, yeah, using your own agency's connections. So maybe you already have some other program that you do in schools, like we do healthy relationship presentations, and then we kind of just added a small close to home part at the end, you know, saying what it is and offering, like, you can put it on your resume and you get stipends and all those things. And yeah, reaching out through your own agency and saying who knows who and where can we go from there.
Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. We'll definitely chat more on some different challenges and how we overcame those in a little bit. And now we can talk a little bit about retaining adult volunteers. I think it's been a challenging year with COVID and people being a little bit more isolated. And I think youth are a little bit they have a different struggle because they're having to keep up with their studies, and there's so much going on in the schools, whereas adults can retreat into their bubble during this past couple of years. And so I think with the isolation, there's a real need for connection and friendship and joy. And so I think one way that we retain our adults is through fostering friendship. And some of the ways we do that is giving adequate time to just connect and not talk about close to home. And so we do a lot of checking in, and we do a lot of processing. What are we going through this week? We have different goals that we talk about. We dive into different stories. And through that, we really get to know these people and what they're about and some of their interests. And so then we're able to be a little bit more strategic in retaining the group, because we can reach out with those interests and involve it into the creative work that we do. So we know that we have an adult that just joined, but is very involved in the music industry in our area. And so just having a casual conversation that went awry during a group, we figured out something that we could actually hone in on, and it became a strength topic moving forward in our build phase. And so really just leaving room to be open to the outcome. And really, you never know what you're going to find if you leave a little bit of space in some of those groups. But also with space and freedom, adults like structure. So also having it be more targeted, more focused. They really like visuals and handouts, and they like literature as well. And so some of the ways we've been tapping in is just giving them educational tidbits that they can kind of chew on. Like we'll give them an article to read in between our groups. Or maybe we'll talk about different, kind of tap into different intellectual ideas. So like what is maybe like something recent that they've read that relates to some of this work. So we're just kind of creating a lot of questions and creating the container, but we're really allowing the adults to step in and kind of lead some of the way.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more, I'm not the adult organizer, but something that Jessica wanted me to bring up was that she really creates time for check-ins. And so in the beginning of like every meeting that she has, she will do a check-in with everyone to see how things are doing. And there was a point earlier in the beginning of this year where folks were sharing really hard things. They had family members who they were losing to COVID. And so that was like an ongoing issue for, I think, a few months that she was navigating. And so kind of like what we were talking about earlier, sometimes it's not close to home related, right? It's just creating the opportunity for them to be people with you and to talk about what's going on in their lives, whether that's like school troubles or that's family or that's COVID, whatever it is. And sometimes her groups are just sharing recipes with one another and they're just sharing different things, right? It's not always negative. It's sometimes very positive, I'd say most of the time, right? But they're also creating that tight-knit community together. And she also wanted me to touch on, right, giving them training and education on a topic of interest, right, that may be outside of close to home. So our adult groups are really interested in cleanliness in their neighborhood. And so they actually partnered with an organization in City Heights that does community cleanups. And we did that like on Saturday morning a few times, and we plan to continue doing them this fall because it's something that the adult groups like really care about and they want to see like a cleaner community, right? And so it's just about giving them, I think, the opportunities to engage in ways that bring in their outside interests, right? Because we kind of inherited this adult group through another program. And so we were trying to make the connections of like, why should they care about sexual violence, right? And so we've done those connections for them, but I think giving them the opportunity to engage in ways that feel right for them, that feel authentic, is what keeps them coming back.
Yeah, and the last thing that I wanted to say, I am also not the adult organizer, but what our previous adult organizer wanted me to share, what has been really helpful is giving the adult volunteers a stake in the work. And so one thing that was really successful in terms of retaining adult volunteers and really engaging them in the work is having them lead the training. So like I mentioned, Close to Home does have an orientation curriculum. So with the adult team, instead of having the adult organizer lecturing at volunteers, each of the topics were assigned out to whoever wanted to take it, and they would create their own PowerPoint, however they wanted to present that information, and then share it back with the rest of the group. So it gave more of a team feel as opposed to just one person talking and the rest listening.
Okay, and I'm just going to talk a bit on making it intergenerational because we have a big focus at Community Beyond Violence in our intergenerational work. In the assess phase, we worked on creating a community survey, asking all kinds of questions like, where do you feel unsafe and what's something we can do? How do you think domestic violence and sexual assault happens here? Questions like that. And once we started on it, we had an intergenerational meeting where we're working on creating this survey. And it was just it was like something happened, it was amazing because there was all this conversation flowing from different sides that normally wouldn't happen. And then we were getting so much progress done. And after that meeting, the adults, they came up and they're like, hey, that was the best meeting so far. Like that was amazing. Why would we stop doing that? And we really looked at it and we said, yeah, why would we stop something that's so strong? So we really just decided to keep it intergenerational and have been. So we've been doing most everything as an intergenerational team, and it's been very beneficial. And the adults really stress just how they've never really seen these opinions or sides before, and that's really the only interaction they get with youth. So we found it to be very, very beneficial. And side note, on the bottom picture, that's when Tasa came and visited us and attended an intergenerational meeting 10 years ago in 2019. So yeah, that's did you all want to talk on intergenerational at all?
I can add that I think for our adults, they just really enjoy being able to work with youth because they just don't have as much capacity with this age group of youth. Like a lot of them have littles, and these are teenagers that we're primarily working with. And I think that they really enjoy being able to work with them. So for example, when we were gearing up to do like our one-on-one conversations, which is where a team member, right, is going to go out into the community and have like a one-on-one conversation with someone about the topics of sexual violence or IPV. They practice with each other and they loved it. They like really loved being able to do that with one another. And it was interesting because we were navigating like one parent who was only speaking in Spanish and one youth who was speaking in English, and then Jessica was interpreting for them. And even with that, right, they felt so connected to one another to be able to have that conversation, to practice with each other, to get to know one another. I think they both groups and our teams really value having other adults and or youth, right, to like have these conversations with.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, just the intergenerational work has been really successful for us. Our photo is the top photo. Our current group of adult volunteers are more young adults, and so there's less of an age gap between the youth and the adults. And I think it's always just been a space for them to learn from each other. And yeah, it's been great.
Also, this is just really funny to me, Craig, when you said 10 years ago, I was like, 10 years ago, wow, you look really great for 10 years ago. And then it registered 2019. It feels like it's been 10 years. So we'll move into our accomplishments.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's close to home is about celebrating all the wins, the small wins is, and then that's something new because a lot of the time it can feel like we want to be moving faster than we are. So one of our big accomplishments was really just creating that team. And that first picture on the top left there is when we partnered with our local youth organization, and they gave us a spot at the fair to, sit next to them and to really spread our message. So that was really the first thing we did as a youth team was spreading our message. And we had a wheel people can spin, and we started to learn about our community because we had questions we'd ask them based on where they'd land on there. And it was just really engaging. The picture next to it where we're holding clipboards is when we did our first community observation. And that was intergenerational. That was the first intergenerational kind of activity we were able to do together besides the survey making. But, going out in the community and really working as a team to see what we notice was amazing. So those were just two, and it was also a really hard time because we had just lost our adult organizer. So it was really, bringing the team back together to kind of move forward. And those are just accomplishments because it's like big steps in the road to get where we are now.
For ours, I wanted to highlight two projects in particular, which are the bottom left-hand corner pieces. So for February 2021, our youth had actually filmed an entire video on why youth should get involved in teen dating violence prevention. And then we attached that to a virtual pledge using Google Form, and then sent it to their high school. And it was requested actually by their high school principal to have something like that. And we plan on continuing that this year to kind of get more youth involved and also really help people understand why this is an important issue. And then for April, for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we did a virtual, a virtual Dear Survivor visual letter. And so each youth was assigned kind of a line. We wrote the letter together. They each took a line and then they created a piece of art for that line. So this was the first one, Dear Survivor, I believe you. And each youth had created their own. And then we put it together and put it on Instagram. And it was actually really successful. It was shared a lot. It was viewed a lot. And so while it was not specific to City Heights, we have a lot of people from San Diego that follow us. And so lots of folks in San Diego were able to see this.
I love hearing everyone's things. It just makes me so happy. So for Lumina Alliance, I think all of us on this call have been doing this work for a long time. So there's probably a lot of things that we're proud of, but the two on the right that I have chosen to highlight are sort of the more recent ones. So in the bottom right corner is an art display that we put on for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month of this year, 2021. And we partnered with a business that had this large open space. All of this shelving was new I guess, real estate that they had acquired, and they hadn't put any of their merchandise on it yet. And so they gave us this space to host all of this art that we had from our TDVM art show in 2020. And so it felt like a really good way to display that art again, to start the conversation again when we were still in lockdown and people still couldn't really gather, but they could go in this space that's a pretty well populated cafe downtown and still interact with our art. So just like being proud of how we thought outside of the box, I guess. And then in the top right, our youth team just created a zine. So there's print copies and digital copies, and it started as a smaller side project that the youth wanted to publish. And it's all about healthy relationships and consent, boundaries, all the things that we love. And it has now spread pretty organically in the community. We've had organizations just find our zine copies in local coffee shops and then reach out to us to do more collaborations and boothing events. And we've also had professors reach out to us saying that they wanted to use our zine as part of their curriculum in their women and gender studies class. So it's been a really great thing that has just like evolved organically. And I'm also really proud of the fact that it was just translated into Spanish by one of our coworkers who does not run Close to Home, but runs a different program. And she worked really hard to get it into Spanish and make it accessible for more people in our community.
All right, so now we want to talk about working the system. And what we mean by this is like, how do we, for lack of a better word, finesse the system, right? And work within the restrictions that we have as like grantees, right? And so we think that there are kind of 3 ways to approach this, right? To always like, in order to like bring in the things that I think our groups are both really passionate about. So first we want to acknowledge, right, it has to be an intersectional approach. As Arthi had mentioned way in the beginning, we cannot do sexual violence or relationship violence work without also addressing other systems of oppression. So we have to like bring that piece into it. It's about leveraging the community partnerships, right? Maybe we as the grantees aren't able to do that work, but maybe there's another community partner that's doing that work and we can partner up with them. And then connecting it back to RPE. How does this actually apply to rape prevention education? How does this apply to primary prevention? So each of us are going to kind of give a little bit of an example of how we have worked the system within our respective counties and state of California.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sarah just said. Really going to your community leaders, your experts, what are they already doing? Because you don't have to create everything in Close to Home. It's good to go and see who's already doing the work and how can you assist. And really going with that viewpoint, not asking them how can we be in there, but just how can we help you? And then, yeah, as for funding, where it comes to how to pay for food and everything like that, it's really reaching out and seeing, a lot of businesses, they need to donate, they need to give out those things. So seeing what could be possible. You could also do your local food bank or anything like that, but it's all about creating those creative solutions around the very numerous obstacles you'll kind of hit.
For us, I've already mentioned it quite a lot, right? But the biggest issues in our neighborhood are gentrification and homelessness, and then I would say cleanliness. And so for us, it was really about connecting how all of these pieces tie to sexual violence prevention, right? And so we know that greening the environment, like literally creating greener spaces, is a protective factor against IPV and sexual violence. And so we've done a lot of work, like I shared earlier, with community orgs that are about cleanups, right? We know that the rise of gentrification in their neighborhood means that more people are going to be pushed out of their homes and potentially increase homelessness. And we also know that there is a link between sexual assault and homelessness. And there was actually a study that said that according to the study of homelessness and marginally housed people, 32% of women, 27% of men, and 38% of transgender persons reported either physical or sexual victimization in the previous year. So we know all of these factors, and I think it's been really helpful for us to then be able to talk to community partners to present like why we care about these issues, how it's connected to sexual violence, right? Like why we should partner together as community organizations. And it's also been helpful for us to tell our agency, this is why we're moving forward with these focus interests or areas of focus, because our teams care about it and this is how it's connected. And so I think all of us can say we're really privileged in California because CDPH does allow for us to like make those connections. But I think if you can like bring in these three pieces, right, I think that's how you can work the system to say like, this is why we should care about these topics, right? And how does it connect to like maybe engaging boys and men, or like building leadership opportunities for women and girls, or even creating like bystander intervention within the community, right? And I think Aarti's going to share too.
Yeah, so at our agency, two things I want to touch on. One, that we do a lot of work partnering with the local Pride Center, so working with that LGBTQ plus community. And we talked about this at the beginning, how folks in the LGBTQ community do experience sexual violence at higher rates than their cishet peers. And so creating spaces where the folks in the LGBTQ community can feel safe is preventing rates of sexual violence and relationship violence. And so one thing that we did during the pandemic was partnering, like I said, with a local Pride Center. We were noticing that people were feeling really isolated from their community. So we hosted virtual movie nights where we delivered gift bags to people's houses, and we had the funding to do so. They weren't great, like they were cute little like kitschy bags, but it felt really nice for people to receive something physical during a pandemic. And then we would get together on Zoom and watch an affirming movie together. And before we watched the movie, we would incorporate our healthy relationship curriculum and do some kind of activity, whether it's around the Relationship Bill of Rights or something about getting consent in daily life, and tying that back into the work that we do. And then the second thing I wanted to touch on was including racial justice work into sexual violence prevention work. So one way that our team said that they wanted to do this was during our ACT phase, was kind of end of summer 2020, fall of 2020, and we were gearing up for our ACT phase. We had decided on a virtual art competition, and our team decided, no, what we have right now doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to not say anything about current events, what's happening in the world. And so we tweaked our ACT a little bit to be more inclusive. And so, like I mentioned, it was an art competition. We changed the prompts that we were soliciting art for to be more racial justice minded. And that gave us a lot more art and really showed us that the community was thinking about these things. A lot of the pieces that we got were really, what's the word? Mind blank, but like really inspirational and just showing us that it's on everyone's mind.
So we do want to talk a little bit about COVID, because obviously for 19 months and probably more, right, we've been navigating what this world looks like, right? And for most of us, all of us, I think we've been primarily doing virtual and now transitioning more into hybrid spaces. But it's really about meeting the team where they're at, right? Like understanding that folks are going to have COVID burnout, Zoom burnout, and that we as facilitators are also going to be experiencing those things. That, you know, it's an opportunity to bring in healthy coping skills and self-care. And I think just like, yeah, meeting the group where they're at. For example, Jessica's group for the adults, they hate Zoom, they're not into it. So she ran all of her calls, or literal calls, on the phone for the entire like past 18, 19 months. That is a huge feat. She takes tons of detailed notes, but right, she's interacting with people that aren't even seeing each other. This is just phone calls. And that's what her adults prefer to do. And so it works for them, but it creates a lot of labor for her, right, as the facilitator, to make sure that she's getting everything that they're saying, that she's like setting them up for success, right? But she has like a close-knit group. And so she met them where they were at, right? Maybe phone calls weren't her preference, but she was like, okay, I'm going to roll with it because this is what the adults need from me in this moment. But I want to turn to my colleagues because I feel like we've all done different things to navigate COVID this past year.
Yeah, I'll be real quick since we're running out of time, but just understanding that, like you said, everyone has their own limitations, especially with Zoom burnout, and especially with how hard the year's been. And really that's part of it, is understanding and being okay with Zoom silence, being okay with ending early. Like it's all about adapting. It's all about being fine with where the team's at. And that goes for close to home in general. We go at the speed of our team. So if we don't move in a week or two, like that's just how it is. It's not always moving forward. And I think COVID has made it slow down even more than I thought was possible, but that's okay. And I'm fine.
Yeah, I will add that with COVID, one thing that even I had to get pushed outside of my comfort zone is to not be afraid to try things. So even if it's something that we didn't think would be successful, we just tried it. And like Craig mentioned, being okay with Zoom silence, also being okay with virtual events where no one shows up, and that's okay too, because that space is still there. And so one thing we did, well, we did a lot of things, but we hosted Instagram lives that were about random topics like come meet my plants, like let's make a recipe together, but just spaces where one of our youth did a meet my chickens, which was great. But like spaces where people could log on and like talk to people, see their friends. And this was very early in the pandemic, like April, May of 2020. And we also worked really hard to be safe about COVID guidelines while still trying to meet with people in person. We're very lucky and slow to have great weather, and also to have a lot of green spaces and parks where we were able to meet outdoors more than 6 feet apart with masks on. And so that we had that way to still create space and like meet our youth while being mindful of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I would say that, right, like it's about asking, I think the group, like what is still possible during this time. I think that's what all of us were doing, was like trying to figure out what can we actually accomplish given the confines of like COVID restrictions, and what does our community need most now, right? And what does our group need most now? And so I think it's just, for us, it was about being open to whatever the needs were of the community, of the groups, of ourselves as organizers. And like, I think just holding space for all of that, right? Making sure that we were holding space for each other, that we were taking care of one another, that we were doing what we could. MK, I'm not sure if you want to add anything or if you want us to transition.
I'll just, like, one positive thing was, one of the adaptations was, normally people wouldn't have been accustomed to Zoom, but one of the things that Zoom has done has actually increased access to folks and across our county. And so that picture right there is a really small little picture, but it was a meeting that happened where we were fortunate to be able to meet with our local police chief and discuss policing philosophies and ethics. And normally that wouldn't have happened unless COVID were to be there and to slow things down. And so there were actually some different happy accidents that came out of COVID. And one of the ways that we adapted was our agency decided to host a COVID vaccine clinic, where we decided to have some volunteers from our group be able to show up and assist with that. And so even though it wasn't directly close to home, our volunteers were finding ways that we could step outside of our scope and help out with the community. And in that process, we were able to help distribute some of our healthy relationship materials. And so we were able to make it kind of an educational campaign at the same time. So definitely thinking about what is possible And sometimes that can take some brainstorming, but we have all found ways to get through. And we still have people showing up to our meetings and adapting. And so I think it really shows and highlights the resilience that we have as humans going through crisis, which is also bringing it back to the work that we do. Is we work with crisis victims and survivors. And so holding space during that takes a trauma-informed lens. And so we try to be aware that people are really going through things during this time and how to be of support. And that is one of the best things about working in this nonprofit realm, is that we do get to make impacts and changes, and get to do that in a gratifying way by leveraging relationships. But yeah, I think we all could have wished for COVID to not have been there, because we all had created different brains like apps and beautiful campaigns that couldn't really happen. And so we basically had to learn how to be a little bit more flexible. And so that was only better training for us as leaders and for our group to learn how to adapt. And so I think that's taking that focus can really help us get through these challenges.
So we wanted to end on a high note with talking about our favorite parts of Close to Home. I think it's really important to name the challenges that we face and be real about those, especially the challenges that coordinators face, especially coordinators who are people of color. And this work is not easy. Spending 40 hours at least per week talking about, thinking about, creating activities about sexual violence and prevention is a lot, especially with everything else going on in the world. And I think it's really important to name that. And there's a lot about this work that we all love. And at least starting with myself, one of the things that has been the most special to me is having this network of coworkers across California and colleagues across California who are doing this close to home work. I think within my agency, I could not do what I do without my prevention team. And no one knows what it's like to run this close to home program as a youth organizer, except for the people who are also doing it. And so to have this group of people that we used to get together pretty regularly and just be with each other and empathize about what we are going through and have that support system has been so vital to like, I think, my resiliency as a close to home youth organizer. So yeah, I just wanted to name that. I'll probably have more to add after everyone goes, but yeah.
Okay, I'll go. I mean, it's a lot. You know, it's like I said, gotta celebrate the small wins, and it's been a long few years. But yeah, I'd say the friendships. You know, within the core groups and within my coworkers and within the other agencies, like I've made a lot of friends. And yeah, sharing those struggles and sharing the good times. And there's been a lot of personal growth, at least for me, you know, doing this work and really going out of my comfort zone. Community organize, like I love prevention. Community organizing, I was like, I don't know how to do that, especially the word organizing, like that doesn't fit me at all. So, but it's all been good, you know, and it's all, I think I needed it. And especially with COVID, I feel like I've also learned a lot. So I'd say the two things for me are the friends and the learning experience.
I also really enjoyed the friendships that we gained through this. And one of the neat things is that our hopes are that we're making this really dramatic, lasting change, and we are changing society on the deepest levels, and we're doing the transformation within, and it's spreading out and rippling everywhere. And it seems like a big pill to swallow, that we can't really end all violence, but we really can a lot of seeds, and we can teach others to plant seeds. And so some of this work does take time, but in the couple of years that I've been involved, I've seen small conversations and maybe small opportunities where we were stretched to grow outside of our comfort zone turn into lasting change in these individuals. making them more inspired, dedicated, and willing to step outside of their comfort zones and engage in important conversations in the community that maybe wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have practiced that in some of our groups. And so just seeing the change and transformation take place on small personal levels is pretty profound, because we really only have we really can change ourselves, right? And then we can have that really changed by how we treat other people and model that behavior. And so our goal is that we don't see all of the impact of this work, that it's bigger than ourselves, and that it's continuing to make waves for the future.
I echo everything that not only my colleagues but friends say. The friendships, I think, are so important. It really takes a village to be able to do this across a massive state like California. But I would say really the impact that it has on the participants, this work is really emotional, and they connect to it in an emotional way as well. I've had several youth transition out, whether it's because they moved or because they went to college or whatever it is. And the things that they've said to me as a result of being part of Close to Home have made me cry, have made me feel honored to have worked alongside them, right? It's clearly had an impact on them for the better, and it's stuff that they will take with them wherever they go, right? These are now young preventionists who understand why violence prevention is so important, why it's a public health issue, why it's connected to other issues of violence or systemic oppression, and they're taking that, right? I have one youth who just started at Johns Hopkins. She has been actually with us since the beginning of our program. She just transitioned out, but she's specifically going to medical school to become like a community-based like doctor, because she believes in this type of work, and she wants to connect violence prevention to that. And I'm like, oh my God, we had that kind of impact on this young person, and that's just so freaking cool. So I think all of the things that, you know, my friend said, and also just seeing how it really impacts the community and how it impacts us. I think what Craig said about community organizing is its own beast. And I think we're all really skilled at doing primary prevention and being facilitators, and organizing challenges you on a whole other level, right? Because it kind of is like, what's the term, like wrangling cats, right? Like you're just trying to get everyone together. And so it can be exhausting and also incredibly fulfilling to do this work. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
You said it so well.
So I think we have time now for Q&A, but before we go to that, we are just going to put up our contact information for everyone, because I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But again, I'm Sarah. I'm with Center for Community Solutions. My colleague Jessica is Jessica Valencia. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the work that we've done in San Diego. And you can check us out on Instagram at CCS_prevents.
And we're Community Beyond Violence. My name's Craig Terry, and there's my colleague MK there.
And I'm Arthi, again with Lumina Alliance. You can follow us on Instagram, close2home_slow. If you're interested in the zine, the link to that is there. My email is there. Please ask us any questions. We talked about a lot of things, and I'm sure there's a million other things that we didn't have time to touch on or even mention. So please ask us any questions that you might have.
And I'm just going to stop sharing for now, but y'all will have access to the slides. So if you didn't catch our emails, you'll get them. But yeah, we'll stop.
I will say I have some preset questions, but in my personal opinion, I think that anything that is bubbling up for participants right now is the most important. And so if there's anyone that has anything, feel free to unmute yourselves, raise your hand, or if you want to drop in the chat real quick. So I'll ask one question that we got from someone who's actually implementing Close to Home themselves in Texas as the start, and then we'll see how it gets the ball rolling. So they asked, have there been any unexpected setbacks or challenges you've experienced while implementing Close to Home? I think you definitely answered a lot around COVID that was unexpected in many ways, but are there any other barriers or unexpected challenges that you can think of?
How do you pick? I feel like there's so many. but really the limitations with food is a big one, really everything else. But it, you know, it's about having those kinds of issues and finding creative solutions for them. I saw Kenneth put in the chat that, you know, even though COVID changed a lot of things, you still think outside of the box and you find other solutions. And I think that's a big part of this grant.
Something that came up in particular for our group was these like really intersectional experiences. So my first cohort was primarily youth of color, and we had one white youth, and there was an interesting dynamic there, especially because that youth did not go to their school, but that youth was also a teen parent, and so that added on like another layer. And so I think just I truly wasn't expecting that, and I don't know why I wasn't expecting that. I thought maybe they were gonna all get along really well, but like it was interesting having to navigate the dynamics of like class, of race, of being a parent, a teen parent at that, all of those factors, right? And including like, you know, yeah, I would say like educational status, like that all played in to how we were like first navigating the group when we first began. And I was like, wow, this is different than what I was expecting to have to navigate.
There's also going to be natural things that come up just in terms of normal group dynamics, because that's just the nature of bringing humans into a group in one space and bringing all their different personalities together. So sometimes managing that as a facilitator can be challenging. And so I've definitely leaned on reaching to outside resources to just help with group facilitation and some conflict management, because there was a little bit of conflicts that did come up because we are talking about intersectional ideas, and also sometimes politics got brought up, because how could it have not in this past year or so? And so it's definitely challenging as a facilitator to hold space for that. So knowing your capacity and knowing when to speak up around, hey, I don't know if we can facilitate or talk about this in a way that could be productive, not being afraid to bring it back, and really remembering that your number one job is holding and creating safe space. And so doing whatever you can do to bring it back. And sometimes that might be addressing conflict directly. And we've had some issues where one of our adults had a very quick mouth and often said things that were sometimes triggering to folks in different groups. And so sometimes we had to call that to full circle. And sometimes we had to consult each other. And Craig and I would chat about like, oh gosh, how do we deal with this? And so sometimes it might have been like a one-on-one conversation. But through some of the conflict, we actually created such a big bonding opportunity, because we were able to get back to what our central focus and our group norms and goals were. And that helped us be a little bit more conscious in how we were moving forward. So just being mindful, there's stuff will come up, but there is a way through. And sometimes as a facilitator, you might feel like, I don't know how to drive this spaceship, and that's okay. It's like, sometimes just keeping it, being the space holder is really what you're doing. And just remembering that. And don't be afraid to slow down. Like sometimes these things can get a little bit heated and elevated because we are talking about these topics. And sometimes we can actually do more harm talking about difficult conversations when we don't have the capacity or the proper container. And so just remembering, is this within my scope or capacity to hold space for this today? And being okay with being transparent. Hey, this is a difficult conversation. We might need to postpone this until we have a little bit more resources or whatnot. But we're definitely just modeling behavior on how to have healthy relationships. So it's great when stuff like this does come up.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like an unexpected challenge. It's probably something to foresee working with youth. Just like we take a trauma-informed approach with survivors, you have to take a trauma-informed approach with the youth. And that is something that I hope that I have grown in so far in this work, is understanding that youth have a lot of things that come up and they can't always commit to the things that they said they were going to do. And that's okay. Part of it is working with them to say, okay, how can we like build on this? Is this like an organizational skill thing that we can work on together? Maybe like a time management thing? And then how much of it is, okay, I need to take a step back and say, okay, you have space to do what you need to do, and Close to Home will still be here when you are ready. So just being really mindful of that. And I also saw Kenneth's comment in the chat. I haven't heard you all say anything about having fun. This is a very intense approach and can be very intimidating. We should be having fun while doing this work. And I think that's a really good thing to make sure that we talk about. And like Craig mentioned, Close to Home is a lot about celebrating. So we didn't talk about it in this PowerPoint, but after every phase, those 4 phases that we mentioned, we have a celebration that's just getting together around food. If we don't have the funds for food, we make it a potluck, and getting together and just celebrating the things that we have accomplished. Sarah said always including food, but the things that we've accomplished in each phase. So I think one of the photos that we've shown, at least from Lumina Alliance, is just purely a celebration, like nothing having to do with Close to Home. So yeah, we do have fun, even though we didn't talk about it in this PowerPoint.
Yeah, fun is definitely a restorative process that we all need right now. So that is, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Kim.
Well, since we are getting, we're at time. Madison, are you okay if I wrap it up for us? I just want to thank you so much, and our attendees, for being. This was an extremely informative conversation, and having really personally no experience in primary prevention, this was extremely educational and really powerful to see the impact that you are having in your communities, and really galvanizing. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I am dropping this evaluation link into the chat for everyone. If you can take just a moment before you log off for the day and complete it, that would be awesome. And that's all I have. Come back for tomorrow, our last day of the Institute.
Thank you all for having us.
Yes, just want to thank y'all so much. Thank you for your time, your energy, your wisdom, expertise, everything. It was so spot on and so, like, just like Kara said, informative, magical. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you so much for like bringing your wisdom to Texas. We appreciate y'all so, so much. And everyone, don't forget game night at 5:30. I'm about to drop the Zoom link. No pressure, but speaking of fun. Thank you everyone from Cali who's joined us. Thank you everybody in the audience who joined us. Everyone have a really great rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you everybody.
Bye.
Hey, everyone.